Hi, Trudi.
Hi, it's lovely to be here. Thank you.
What's particular? I'll take the question again. What need did you wanted to fill with Wild and Kind?
So when we first started Wild and Kind, it was a organization that was originally kind of just built from pure social impact and the identifying a need for. I mean, it was really thinking about loneliness and isolation back in the very early days. We a couple of friends, we were kind of in our mid to late 20s. We realized that we didn't have those opportunities to meet new people anymore. In the same way that you maybe did when you were younger, socializing, a lot of it was built around alcohol and having to spend money to go out to expensive places. And so just kind of for fun, we ran some craft hangouts
Oh,
at
nice.
my flat, just, some beer and collage making. And I think we just put out some Facebook posts and like people came that we didn't know, not just kind of friends, people came that we didn't know and we thought, oh, this is fun, this is cool. And so we did them more and more, and the more that we did these events, the more we realized people were kind of showing up. And again, that we didn't know were coming on their own, a lot of people with anxiety. And we kind of realized, oh, there's this need for, social spaces. Particularly at the time, the focus was on women and people with marginalized genders. And we yeah, the need kind of just developed as not accidental, but just relatively organically because of our own needs and wants as women, and yeah, it just kind of snowballed from there. Really, that was. I mean, that's not necessarily the focus that we have at the moment, but that's really where it started.
So, y- y- does that mean the scope has gradually changed or expanded or increased? What's the present scope now?
Well, now our focus is actually more on neurodivergent social entrepreneurs. So obviously, over the years, that has changed, but there's been like a relatively logical path to that change. When we first started, um, our focus was on women and people with marginalized genders because that was our experiences. We were doing a lot of craft hangouts because that, again, was the things that we wanted to do. And then at the time, I had experience of running a small brand. So a lot of what we wanted to do was help startup creatives get into the creative industry. Now, obviously, as time has gone on and we've gone through huge economic challenges, as we all know, in the last 8 years, um, my experiences and my knowledge and my skills have also changed as well. So in the early days, it was really about, you know, a kind of focus on creatives and creating spaces. And it's not that we don't, identify with those demographics anymore. And it's not that we don't support those demographics anymore. It's just that through all of the challenges in building a business through pandemic, which was the first, I mean, there was obviously things before that, Brexit and stuff. The pandemic, I mean, for everybody, that was a huge thing. Um, but now with the cost of living crisis and Wild and Kind has grown a lot, and then, we've lost a lot of money as well, and then we've kind of got it back to a point where it's breaking even. But I think for me, I just love helping people and I love sharing my wisdom and my knowledge. But it's no longer a kind of focus on the creative industries, which was my kind of experience in the beginning. It's now on third sector, and obviously being neurodivergent, one of the groups of people that I feel like I can relate well to and explain things well to is other neurodivergent people as well. So it's just kind of taken a little bit of an organic path, like I think a lot of social enterprises follow.
So, I would like to know more about the early stage of these of Wild and Kind. You did mention that you started from your living room, getting friends together in their 20s, your friends together when you are still in your 20s, and you sort of gradually progress. Was there a point, was there anything you saw that made you decided that I have to do this? Something like, I cannot but do this. Was there any moment like that for you?
Absolutely. And I think it was really when I think we'd been running these kind of workshops and hangouts for maybe a couple of months or so. And we'd started them in my flat. And then I actually ended up in a working collective because I was running my kind of small brand at the time, called the Glasgow Collective. I had a studio there and they had a big, co-working space. They had some area that we could use for our workshops. And so they kind of leveled up. We were able to have more people come. We were able to, they had a big kind of kitchen, so we could do baking and things like that. We did like a cookie night.
Wow.
And there was a few people that came on their own that had anxiety, and like visibly so. Sometimes when you meet somebody and you can tell that they're feeling really, really nervous and anxious in the situation. But they would come on their own again. That's like a big step for people. And then they would come again the next week, and then they would, come again. And before you know it, they're telling you how this has just become such a valuable thing for them
Mm.
to be able to leave the house, to have something to do in the evening. There are a lot of people, and again, this is before the pandemic. So back then, we're trying to say to funders like, "Oh, there's actually an issue with loneliness and isolation." They're like, "Is it really?" But actually, it's I think for people, particularly in their 20s, you finish uni, you go and get a job, and if you're not kind of geographically close to like your friends, it can become really, really isolating. So I think it was recognizing that for a lot of young people, and again, our particular focus was on women and people with marginalized genders, but it, realizing that spaces like that could actually be a real lifeline for people to be able to have a space, like a third space. I didn't really know the phrase third space at the time. But yeah, in the early days, that was the initial kind of like aha moment that made us think, okay, this is something that we can do, therefore we should do it. Probably a little bit of that social responsibility coming into it, being like, okay, I should be the person to to make this happen. Yeah.
Wow. That's that's particularly interesting. And I love the fact that, it's a need that you started solving for gradually. Then, it's expanded over time. It was not the other way around when somebody thinks of an idea and, starts uh, trying to solve for a problem that really do not exist.
Yeah.
I'm sure you will have seen a lot of that around where when somebody creates a solution for a problem that does not exist. You started from the problem, something, you have people around who identify to have this problem. You solved it for them. It was from your room. Then, you went outside. It's becoming bigger. So the next question will be a sort of follow up to that. Do you feel entrepreneurship, being a founder, did you think it was something you had to grow into? Or was there anything in your past that prepared you for what you are doing now?
I mean, it's a funny one because I think a lot of people that maybe start a business or a social enterprise, I think a lot of us didn't really have prior experience. Um, and I was a relatively rowdy young person. I didn't fall into, um, my education was not great in terms of exams and whatnot. I think that's a very common problem for a lot of people with ADHD, particularly when they're undiagnosed. Um, and then I did eventually go to art school, and I was a nanny for years, and so I kind of flipped about a lot of careers. But I think there was a point where I realized I cannot be an employee, if that makes sense. Not, I don't deal well with having kind of authority and hierarchy structures and whatnot. And so I think there's maybe something internal within me that is making me more likely to be I think there's something within me that makes me more likely to follow the path of entrepreneurship. And I think that might be the same for other people. Um, but yeah, I think there's definitely something that's kind of in your blood with it more so than but more so than something preparing you for it. And obviously when I did go to art school and then I finished
Oh,
up and
nice.
um I started a small fashion brand and it was from my flat. I did well with it, but it wasn't I didn't really push it to maybe what it could have been, but I think that probably gave me the initial taste of running a business, if that makes sense. So like the chin of things and making lots of mistakes and the stuff that you learn in the early stages. So I think that definitely was maybe part of the building block as well. But I think for me, a lot of it actually just felt very
Intuitive?
intuitive, yeah, and natural
Sweet.
and just okay. And I think for a lot of people, it's that again, that kind of eureka moment of, oh, this is hey, I've figured out what I'm trying to do.
That's nice. For most founders, and I have found that most of the time the ones that succeed, because you've been doing this for the last 7, 8 years now,
Mm.
the ones that are able to keep long for that, long, 8 years is long. You have to wake up every day and do those kind of things every day. These people who are able to do that for that length of time are people who actually found a need to meet. If, for instance, you started it and nobody was interested in it for the last 8 years, I'm sure you would have stopped.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, which I want us to go back a little to the early stages of Wild and Kind. How was it?
Well, the funny thing about us is we've kind of pivoted a lot. So there's probably a lot of people out there that know Wild and kind of as a slightly different thing.
Different phases of it.
And in the very early days, because I had a background in embroidery, I did, like I said, I ran that kind of small brand and I used to do a lot of machine embroidery. And so when we first started and we realized, okay, there's this social need for, helping with loneliness and isolation.
Mm.
That's our social impact. How will we make money? Well, okay, I kind of know how to do embroidery, so that's going to be the thing that we make money from. But we quite quickly kind of realized that that wasn't actually the path that we wanted. Like, we didn't want to just be churning out embroidered jumpers and t-shirts, and it was a good way to make money, but it wasn't necessarily the kind of the passion. So what we decided to do was, rather than us do the work for people, we would train people up. So
Oh, nice.
we would teach people how to do embroidery, and we would teach people how to do printing, and we would take on a big space where we would have all of our equipment, a co-working space where people could come,
Wow.
rent the equipment. We would teach them studio spaces, just a really nice creative community space.
Wow.
And so we opened that early 2020. Yeah. Everybody's face when I say that. I mean, we had the key. Yeah, we literally had the keys for about 5 weeks, and a 6-year lease. So
On a 6-year lease.
yeah. Oh, things happen.
Right.
So so that was our first kind of like, okay, things were going to plan. We were all really excited, and then that was our first probably like, oh, we need to think of a new direction. And at that point, we could have just closed. A lot of places did. We could have just said, "Oh, wow," then we
Which is understandable.
yeah, this is a bad sign. Let's just close. But no, we decided to push through, and we were really, really grateful to have lots of support within the third sector. So there was lots of funding available to help us get through. We were able to invest in some more equipment and then kind of shift the focus back to running a print and embroidery company where we were doing it for other people again, just like your typical print and embroidery company. And it just took off, and it did really well for a while.
During COVID?
During COVID, yeah. So I think I think year one turnover was maybe about £5,000, next to nothing. Year two was about 25,000. Again, we were kind of finding our feet. And then year three was about 180,000.
So yeah. Making the bag.
So it was a huge jump in terms of turnover, but equally that was stressful. Growing so fast and all of a sudden needing to hire
Hire
people to come in, and we were relatively inexperienced in terms of running a business, being employers. But it grew for a while. Again, we were able to get more funding to keep building things up, and then we got to a point where we got the Catalyst fund from Firstport, which is social investment. So it's a loan, it's not a grant, and we we got that through, and we hired a salesperson, and we were going to have this big push into embroidered workwear. So, it was a good industry to be getting into. And then the cost of living crisis just swooped in, and all of a sudden, a lot of the companies we were going to be working with were, saying, actually, we're going to put a hold on stuff that's not necessarily, and we were doing, high quality, sustainable, ethical, so that higher price point, and it was just a nightmare. And it just didn't work. And sometimes that happens, things just don't work. So that's kind of what brought us back round to, even though, I say the kind of pre-pandemic plan, obviously it's not necessarily the same demographic now, because we're taking a lot of the skills and experience we've had over the years to work with a demographic that's going to value or receive kind of value more from what we're doing. But yeah, that was kind of a little bit of the wobbly story of it all.
That's quite interesting. I love the trajectory of 5K to 25K to 180K.
Yeah.
Now we are in the
And it's kind of come back in the other as well, but here we go.
It's nice. That's nice. Let's talk about money a little bit. If you were to start Wild and Kind again tomorrow morning, with no money, what are you gonna do?
I mean, it would probably be easier to start it again tomorrow with no money than it was to start it again with lots of debts. Because when we had our hard reset, we had a huge amount of debt. So if I was to start tomorrow with no money, like I say, it'd probably be slightly easier. I think there's probably a lot of things I would change. Like I don't think it's good to like live with regret too much because I think some of the most valuable lessons I've learned have been when things have gone disastrously wrong because you have to you find out so much about yourself. You kind of find so much about, people and how to be or like how you figuring out who you want to be as a leader and who you want to be as an employer. I think it's probably a better way to explain it. But God, that's a trick. It's funny because I think I would actually probably do something different, and not because of not enjoying, because I love what I do, but I think there's so many. I think sometimes when you've built something for a long period of time, I think there is a point for everybody where you get to a point where you might say, well, actually, I've kind of done what I've set out to do. Like, what's next? I think if I was to start, and I'm a problem solver, I love puzzles and I love like new opportunities. And so, yeah, I think if I was to start again tomorrow, I would actually be like, oh, let's kind of maybe do something different. I don't know. It's a funny one to think about. But I think when it comes to the finances in general as well, the funding landscape is totally different now than it was when I started. Well, I think there's just less funding, more people looking for it, and I think that makes it quite difficult.
It's much more competitive now to get funding.
I think as well with AI, like I think AI, pros and cons, but for me being dyslexic, being able to have tools to help me write and be able to dictate and write and whatnot, very, very helpful. But I think for funders and assessors, the quality of applications they must get must be so much higher now because everybody can use AI to help them write it. So I don't know, it must be so much more difficult to assess these things. Yeah.
I've never thought of that before.
Yeah.
So we are still talking about the early stages
Yeah.
of Wild and Kind. What was the simple, small decision that you made that made the most significant impact, like the most leveraged decisions you made while starting up Wild and Kind?
Small decisions impact. It's hard to think of any one, and I mean, I think it's
Decision.
well, I think when you think back, so much happens. And I think, you have decisions that you make because it's an exciting decision and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, let's do this or let's do that. And then you kind of have decisions that you have to make because, the shit's hit a fan and you're like, okay, we need to figure this out. I think in the early stages, in fact, probably one of the biggest decisions that actually really, really shaped everything, even though at the time it felt like a disaster, was deciding to take on the lease for a 2,000 square foot space when previously we had just operated from a 300 square foot office. So
From 300 to 2,000.
From 300 square foot to 2,000 square foot. So that decision, and actually the funny thing is I kind of wanted to do that about a year prior to when we did it. This would have been maybe only like a year and a half after starting Mod and Kind. But we the person that I was kind of like running things with at the time was a little bit hesitant about making such a big leap when we were kind of such early stages. So I was kind of like, okay, that's fine. Let's kind of hold off and see. But actually, had we made that decision early on, maybe it would have been a disaster. Even though the decision we made at a later point at the time felt like a disaster, at the time, everything has led to where we are just now. And had we not taken on that big unit, maybe we would have closed because maybe the pandemic would have come in and we'd taken a smaller space and, it felt too much at the time. I think, you can always look back in hindsight and think, oh, I wonder if we'd done that, or I wonder if we'd done that. But actually, ultimately, where we're at just now, and there's still difficulties, but it's those early decisions that kind of, at the time maybe made us feel stuck. But
Wow, that's cool.